And I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Christine Curry, and I'm the Iowa Outreach Coordinator of the Izaak Walton League's Upper Mississippi River Initiative, known as UMRI. Welcome to our 2023 series on soil and water conservation, Thinking Like a Watershed program. The monthly presentations are jointly hosted with our Izaak Walton League colleagues of the Upper Mississippi River Initiative, and our co-hosts this evening include Panora Conservation chapter member Chris Hanning. And the Des Moines chapter, they're not going to Zoom in tonight because they have another program, so we will not be hearing from them. This evening, I'd like to introduce my Minnesota colleague, Caroline Van Shank, and she is going to introduce this evening's speaker, if all of the technology works out. So Caroline, go ahead.
All right, great. All right. Well, if my technology fails me, Christine's going to take back over. All right. Our program tonight we called The Mississippi Today and Do We Send It Away? Our guest tonight is Erin Spry, a hydrologist with the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association. And we subtitled our program, How a Five-State Alliance is Preparing for Water Diversion Challenges and the Surprising News in 25-Year Trends. So here's what we wrote, and this was an Erin and me joint effort here. The Upper Mississippi River Basin Association, which she is representing tonight, was established in 1981 as a forum for interstate cooperation. And 8 years later, the 5 states of the association, that's Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, Missouri, and Wisconsin, created a charter to conserve the water resources of the basin. With anticipated demands for Mississippi River water on the horizon, its board now wants an update, an impact assessment that includes a water budget of the river, current water uses and diversions, and water availability for starters. This would, in practice, help the Upper Mississippi River Basin states understand the impacts of individual state water diversion decisions and also strengthen the agreement of the states within the charter. So what I learned from Erin is the following. Informing this scoping work are the recent outcomes of a nearly 30-year assessment of select hydrological and ecological health markers of the Upper Miss. Results include widespread changes in fish communities and precipitation patterns, a decreasing floodplain forest area, and even some good news about water quality. This is the present tense background that Erin will discuss with us before circling back to describe what she hopes becomes a timely response to what I call the rumors and realities of water diversion. I think that's enough. Erin, are you ready to share your screen and take it away here?
Yes, I am. Just let me know if you can see.
It looks fabulous.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, my name's Erin Spry. I'm from the UMRBA, the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association. And I'll talk about the UMRBA today. Oh, there we go. I'll be talking about the UMRBA today, give you a rough introduction of what we do. Then I'll be walking through the status and trends of the Upper Mississippi River system, which is the ecological trends in this area. Excuse the cat. And then I'll walk through the Upper Mississippi River Basin Charter, which is our charter on diversions in the Upper Mississippi River Basin. And then we'll walk through the development of the cumulative impacts assessment, which is that response to growing concerns about diversions in this area. Excuse me, 1 second, I'm gonna move this cat. All right, before I launch into a discussion about the Upper Mississippi River system and the Upper Mississippi River Basin, I'd like to just take a beat to distinguish the two. So the Upper Mississippi River system, I'm sure many of you know, are these 2 blue lines here, and that's the main stem of the Upper Mississippi River, and then the main stem of the Illinois River. Can you guys see my cursor? Okay, perfect. The basin, however, is this yellow area here. So I know that seems very basic, but there's initiatives in the river system and there's initiatives in the river basin. So I just want to give you a solid frame of reference as we move on. So UMRBA, the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association, is the governor-established forum for interstate water resource planning and management on the Upper Mississippi River, and we represent the common interests of our member states, which are Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, and Wisconsin. In part, UMRBA does this by facilitating and fostering cooperative planning and by creating a forum for discussion, study, and evaluation of major issues. We also serve as the governor-designated interstate water quality entity for the Upper Mississippi River Basin. So I'll be talking today mostly about our charter and the UMRR program, but since we're not generally a public-facing entity, I decided to walk through some of our focus areas so that you become more well acquainted with it. We support ecosystems through our UMRR and NEST programs, and that's the Upper Mississippi River Restoration and Navigation and Ecosystem Sustainability programs. Both of these are partnerships of state and federal agencies, as well as nonprofit organizations, and they all work to improve the functions of ecosystems on the Upper Mississippi. We'll be covering a UMRR product later, and that's the Status and Trends product. Navigation is also supported through the NEST program. UMRBA conducts resilience planning to strengthen floodplain resilience to the effects of flooding, which includes methods such as reducing runoff, increasing floodplain connectivity, and developing new channel maintenance strategies. UMRBA is also the coordinator for the Upper Mississippi River Spill Response Plan, which includes detailed procedures for spill response on the Upper Mississippi River. And finally, we're the Forum for Interstate Water Quality Monitoring on the Upper Mississippi River, as I said before. So we are the coordinator for all water quality sampling efforts on the river, and we compile that data into reports. There we go. So this is the product I mentioned before. This is a UMRR program product, which is the Upper Mississippi River Restoration Program. That's the federal and interstate partnership that monitors the Upper Mississippi River system. So that's the main stem of the Mississippi River and the Illinois River. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because it's highly unique to this river system. It captures 25 years of monitoring data within this river system. And it also provides really important context to what we think about when we think about uses of the river. Generally, when we're talking about uses of the river, people colloquially will have an understanding of the human resources, the human uses of the river. But when we use the term uses of the river, we also mean the ecosystem services that the river provides. So this is context to that. The ultimate takeaway of this report, which is a very large report, and I'd encourage you to read it because it's very informative. But the ultimate takeaway is that the river system is a large and diverse system with many regional differences. Long-term monitoring has allowed us to observe these changes, and there are changes that are happening locally, and then there's changes that are happening across the system. This report identifies statistically significant trends in ecological conditions. It includes information on water quality, aquatic vegetation, fisheries data. It talks through geomorphic, climate, and ecological gradients across the UMRS. And then it investigates possible drivers of ecological dynamics, including aquatic vegetation and invasive carp. Recently, so probably in the past 2 months, they're in the soft release stage. We have developed UMRBA, and the UMRR partnership has developed 5 fact sheets on the key findings in this report. The report is very large. It covers a lot of data. So we broke it down into 5 key findings so that people could get a snapshot of some of the more important storytelling pieces of this report. So they cover forest loss, aquatic plants, water quality, fisheries, and sediment. But a major driver of most of these trends is this statement that we're calling, there is more water in the river in the system more of the time. So that means that there's increasing flood events on the river, and those are occurring both more often and for longer periods. And that has been increasing over the past 25 years of monitoring. I'm just going to walk you through 3 of the 5 fact sheets that the UMRBA and the UMRR partnership has developed. Each of them tells a complex story. And since there's so much going on, I'll only walk through 3, but I'd encourage you to look at the rest. So the first one I'll talk through is changes in sediment. And this tells a story of the impacts of changing land use in the Upper Mississippi River Basin, as well as changing hydrology and how an altered river responds to those changes. As I just said before, there's more water in the river more of the time, and that can mean increased sediment transported into and throughout the river through erosional processes and riverbed movement. And where the sediment is being deposited largely impacts two different ecosystems. The first ecosystem is backwater beds. The backwaters of the upper Mississippi River system were once a large network of lakes, channels, and ponds, and are now restricted to much smaller areas of land in the northernmost basin of the river system. These backwaters are critical for native fish populations who use this area as overwintering habitat. Increased sediment input to the river is causing these backwaters to fill in, which reduces that habitat. Further downriver, sediment is also accumulating on riverbanks. This process is an essential habitat builder on the river. So there's areas where sediment is having a negative impact and areas where sediment is having a positive impact to make things complicated. And species such as willow and cottonwood trees require sandy banks to germinate, which is it's an important forest building process. And then shorebirds such as yellowlegs use this area as forage. The second fact sheet I'll walk through is aquatic plants. This is pretty much an astounding good news story of the bounce back of aquatic plants in the upper impounded floodplain reach and the lower impounded floodplain reaches of the upper Mississippi River. So these are these two reaches here. There is less data on the Illinois floodplain reach and the open river reach here. But what we do know is that reduced water clarity is having a negative impact on these areas. But in these upper areas, water has cleared and the aquatic plants are bouncing back. The third fact sheet I'll share with you is floodplain forests. This one incorporates both historic forest loss and current forest loss. So floodplain forests have faced losses since 1891 and continue to do so, although the mechanism of that forest loss has changed over time. In the past, from 1891 to 1899, floodplain forests were lost due to the development of the lock and dam system, expansion of row crop agriculture, and urban communities. Now, flooding in this floodplain forest is actually causing further losses. So floodplain forests, although they are engineered to handle flooding throughout the year, they're not engineered to handle the onslaught of flooding that is happening nowadays, which it's happening more often, it's happening more regularly, and it's happening more extremely over time, and this is overwhelming tree species. This side-by-side comparison right here shows live trees in 2013 and then live trees in 2019. The live trees are in red. So this is fragmenting these floodplain forests over time. There's two more fact sheets I'll let you explore in your own time. The subjects are the fisheries on the river and water quality conditions on the river. Overall, I can tell you that native fish are bouncing back in many of the reaches of the upper Mississippi River Basin. Although in areas where invasive carp have taken over, those fish species remain suppressed. Water quality has improved in many of the reaches of the upper Mississippi and Illinois rivers. We pull out three different indicators for water quality. Those are nitrogen, phosphorus, and total suspended solids. Those are three nutrients caused mostly by agricultural producers and other human uses in the basin. These have all substantially decreased, leading to bounce back of more aquatic plants, increased diversity in the river. We love for folks to use these to tell stories of what's happening on the river. So just let me know after if you'd like more links to them. There's links in the chat. And let me know if you have any opportunities to use these. So we covered UMRBA, we covered the ecological status and trends, and now we'll get to the charter, which is UMRBA's effort to preemptively account for diversions on the river. So the Upper Mississippi River Basin Charter was established and signed by the 5 state governors in October 1989. The state's interest in having this charter was actually prompted by significant controversy with the potential out of the basin withdrawal in the Great Lakes. While this diversion didn't occur, the deliberations in court cases have informed our approach. Additionally, the states in both the Great Lakes and Upper Mississippi were aware of a sideboard defined by the Supreme Court that attempts to prohibit diversions across state boundaries, and we gained knowledge that that would be struck down as unconstitutional if challenged. Therefore, both the Great Lakes and Upper Mississippi River charters emphasize the process of notification and consultation among the signatory governments. This allows the states to be informed and participate in any individual decision without violating the principle of even-handedness. The Upper Mississippi River Basin Charter is an anticipatory strategy, and that's designed to ensure the sound and well-informed decisions that are made about the region's water resources. It serves as an expression of the state's mutual concern and shared stewardship of the basin's valuable water resources. One of the links in the chat shared before the presentation is to the charter, and I'll walk through what you'll find in there. I'll walk through the findings, purposes, and principles, and then I'll walk through the notification and consultation process. So the findings are as follows. States have a duty to protect, conserve, develop, and manage the water resources of the basin. Water resources are highly valuable and used for various purposes, including non-human purposes. States with federal government have a responsibility to maintain and enhance all aspects of the river multipurpose system, meaning both navigation and ecosystem services must be maintained. Without careful management, future diversions may have significant adverse impacts on environment, economy, and welfare. And management is governed by many jurisdictions. Effective management requires a continuing spirit of respecting state laws and mutual cooperation. The purpose statement is fairly brief. The main elements are to conserve the levels and flows of water resources, protect the environmental ecosystem, provide a foundation for future investment and development, and assure all significant benefits and impacts are considered before granting a diversion. The principle on integrity describes the enormous value of the basin's water resources and many users and uses, including fish and wildlife habitat, and recognizes that the water resources in the basin transcend political boundaries. The principle on notification and consultation explicitly states that interbasin diversions would not be supported if individually or cumulatively that would have a significant adverse impact on in-stream flows, in-basin uses, and the ecosystem. It describes the purpose of notification and consultation among states as allowing signatory states to express concerns, identify their interests, and develop mutually acceptable agreements or take other actions if they feel appropriate. The notification and consultation process mentioned in the charter has not changed since the establishment of the charter. Every year, each state reports at UMRBA's winter meeting whether a diversion has occurred or is being considered in their state. As of today, no state has reported a diversion that would trigger the charter, which is a diversion of 5 million gallons per day over a 30-day average. There are no known out-of-basin diversions in the Upper Mississippi River Basin. Before I move on, I'll cover some questions on that prompted us to renew the charter. The first is, the charter does not specify whether diversions apply only to surface water. So there was a question brought up of what if somebody is pumping water out of a groundwater source, out of a well, out of a surficial aquifer right next to the river? What happens? Obviously the river is impacted, but is that something controlled by the charter? Second, what is the geographic extent of the charter? We broke down earlier the difference between the river system and the river basin. The Upper Mississippi River Basin Charter is what it's called, but a lot of the talk inside of the charter kind of refers to the main stem. So which one are we referring to? Third, what are the specifics of the notification and consultation process? There's a system of alerts, but what about the feedback process? What about if a state has something to say to another state? Which one are we referring to? And then fourth, we assure that all significant impacts and benefits are considered when reviewing a diversion request. What does that mean? And how would we go about considering all of those impacts and benefits? In light of renewed interest in diverting water from the Mississippi River, struggles for water within the Missouri River Basin, multiple diversion requests from states in the Upper Mississippi River Basin, the UMRBA board recommended that we renew the charter and update the consultation process to create a foundation for data-led decisions on water resources. We started investigating the process of diversion requests. An ad hoc team of water resource experts was formed, and these experts were asked to respond to a request for a diversion from water in the upper Mississippi River Basin. This facilitated process led us to concluding that an update on the notification and consultation process to include standard reporting methodology was needed. They also noted that consumptive uses and diversions need to be defined. The geographic extent of the diversion charter also needs to be defined, and tribal communities need to be included in the process. However, we couldn't just stop at renewing the charter. We also needed to develop a data-driven decision-making framework. So to do so, the ad hoc team recommended creation of a cumulative impacts assessment of diversions in the upper Mississippi River Basin. This cumulative impacts assessment would first establish human uses of water in the basin, and then it would create a water budget, an assessment of inflows and outflows of water. The current impacts and future vulnerabilities of the river system would be determined, and an investigation would be made of the impacts of invasive species and waterborne pathogen transfer in the event of an approved diversion. So that's where the work is today. We're currently building a budget of water inflows and outflows in the basin. This includes natural processes and human uses of water. To understand the water budget, we'll be using USGS stream gauge data and major tributaries, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers lock and dam data from main stem flows to understand the residence time of water in each pools, and precipitation data from the National Weather Service. To understand human uses of water in the basin, we're creating a multi-state database of known water uses. Water uses are diverse, from municipal water supplies to agriculture to industrial uses, and combining a database of water requires creating our own categories for water uses, as each state defines water use slightly differently and records water use differently. So that's making database building a bit harder. After a water budget is assembled and water uses are compiled, we will begin to assess water availability in the basin. We are not quite sure of the scoping of that effort. We will be finding a contractor to possibly do modeling efforts, but at the bare minimum, the Great Lakes Cumulative Impacts Assessment does a great job comparing their water budget to interbasin diversions. And we feel confident that going off of that model will start us off on the right track. As an example, I've included the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin water budget here. And here they compare runoff, precipitation, evaporation to interbasin diversions, the St. Lawrence River outflows, and consumptive use. And they also compare historical flows to relatively modern day flows. So this is a great model for understanding how large these interbasin diversions are relative to the water budget. And then going forward, the cumulative impacts assessment is built to be renewed and expanded as research capabilities expand. The new cumulative impacts assessments will be published every 5 years, as far as we've planned right now. And in future iterations, we hope to include information on the impacts of climate change, possibly modeling efforts to target areas on the river that may be impacted from diversions. So that's where we are now. We're currently working to find funding to establish a database, and we're working to compile data from multiple sources and refine what we're expecting for our first assessment. And that's where I'll end and take questions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Erin. See, I think Chris Henning got bumped off. I see a couple of questions. One from West Vulcanant. I bet you might not have said that correctly. West asked, what are 3 rivers that feed into either the Mississippi or the Illinois rivers that give you the most concern for their impact in areas such as sediments and chemicals that may affect plants, floodplain, forest loss?
There's a lot there because sediments and chemicals are operating like in different areas in different ways, but I would say that the Illinois waterway, the main stem of the Illinois River, is having consistent issues with sediment, and that is suppressing aquatic plant growth. It's also having issues with certain fish communities. And so that's an area of concern for many managers at this time. Other than that, many tributaries have different issues going on. It depends on the style of agriculture in the area. It depends on the geology. It depends on how much water is moving through there. There's great information in the report that breaks down sub-watersheds. So I'd encourage you, if you're interested, to go into that ecological status and trends report and look for more. But I think every sub-watershed has different challenges.
Erin, just from a general concept point, with the modeling, the data that is from this report, was it primarily from modeling or was it actual data?
So there's there's a couple different approaches. So our fisheries data was from actual sampling efforts, and that was 25 years of data. And the aquatic plants was also sampling, as was water quality. Those are people out there every day sampling for those. The forest loss and the sediment indicators were from surveys. So that's actually 21 years of data. It's a decade survey that's done. So I think this is pretty representative of what we're seeing with those surveys. And so that's a little bit of modeling, a little bit of digesting done in ArcGIS and other programs to determine how much floodplain forest area was lost, or in the case of sediment, a lot of this information is built off of mapping deltas and then comparing them year by year, or mapping islands or any other landform.
Okay, and Mary Ellen has a question about your source of funding. What is the UMRBA? What is the source of funding for your organization?
It's cobbled together from a lot of sources. I'll say that. There's some of our projects are funded by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Sometimes we get funding from USGS. Other times we get funding from the US EPA. A lot of federal sources of funding. There's also state dues. So the states that are members of the UMRBA pay yearly dues to support us so that we can continue advocating for state issues.
Okay, great. Then we had another question. Can we get a map of all that will be included in this database? Who will be inputting data? Will multiple sources, including citizen scientists, be allowed to and identified?
I actually have a question for Terry.
Okay.
What kind of citizen science would you like to see in this? And every state is required to help to fund UMRBA if they're a member, one of our member states.
Well, I'm not exactly sure, but I know that when it comes to, I would love to see more databases where citizens can input information, because sometimes we're aware of something that might be hyper local that would be nice to keep track of, to see if there's a pattern. I'm thinking of, for example, because we're going to see more warming and more E. coli outbreaks, I'd like to know where there are not E. coli, the algae blooms.
Harmful algal blooms. HABs.
Yeah. I would love to see that. And I know that so far there's no database that I'm aware of that shows that. Does that make sense?
That does. That would be more aligned with our Interstate Water Quality Initiative, and we are ramping up our third phase of monitoring for our interstate water quality in 2025. So it's a little bit farther out, but in that we are developing an idea of how to monitor for HABs. And one of the problems is there's not always somebody from an agency there to take a picture, and citizen science is a very effective form of detecting harmful algal blooms. So I wouldn't say that I have a resource for you right now, but there is stuff in the works currently to develop a better system of monitoring for that. There's other issues with harmful algal blooms in terms of photographing it, because taking pictures at certain times of day will you'll see it and it'll be visible, and certain times of day it won't be. So you can't just set up a monitoring camera to see if something will pass through, and they're so flashy. So yeah, I think it's a good idea. I also think it's something that we're working on developing. There's also a really interesting project going on with our environmental justice initiative, where some of our members of UMRBA are identifying informal beaches, and these are beaches that aren't necessarily set up by cities or counties or state parks, but they're beaches on the Upper Mississippi River that people are using, and we're trying to develop a way to notify people who use those beaches of harmful algal blooms in the area. So that's also another initiative. Oh, and I see there's a clean water hub, but yeah, I don't really have, I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for you.
Well, that's
right now.
okay. It's on your radar, so I'm very happy to hear about that. And are you by chance working with like the Sierra Club? Because like I know our Sierra Club in Michigan is super active about water issues. And I happen to be lucky and live in a very active watershed as well. Huron River Watershed Council is where I'm at.
Yeah, I know that Sierra Club attends our quarterly meetings.
Oh, good.
So they're aware of what's going on. I don't know if they're any more involved than anything like that.
So I will come up with, Mary Ellen Miller has another question about, is every state required to help fund the UMRBA?
Yes, so every state that's in the Upper Mississippi River Basin that designated our authorities, that's Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, and Wisconsin, they are required to fund UMRBA. And in turn, we provide them with a forum so that they can communicate with each other, and we coordinate many initiatives between the states.
Thanks, Erin. Now we have this one from Wes. And this is really cool. Narrowing my earlier question, as a Minnesotan, are you aware of the issues of the Minnesota River or the Root River in southeast Minnesota as they flow into the Mississippi?
I'd have to say I'm not. Would Wes tell me what those issues are?
Wes, do you want to unmute?
Are they? I could guess that maybe they're nutrient contribution issues.
Wes, if you unmute and ask the question, maybe you can enlighten us a minute.
Wes is unmuted right now.
Well, ask him to talk.
Maybe having problems with the microphone.
Oh, could be.
Did Mary Ellen Miller get her question? She has her hand up.
I think we asked her question just a minute ago. She just needs to lower her hand.
I have another one, Chris.
Oh,
While
Erin,
we're waiting on Wes, why don't you do a quick one, Mary Ellen?
yeah, Erin, when you went over the sediment data collection, I didn't catch it all. I know that I just heard recently that a group out of Illinois, maybe one of the universities, uses a satellite imaging to monitor and try to figure out, for example, how much land in our Midwest is dedicated to cover crops. So they're using satellite images to determine that. Are you using some system like that when you look at sediment?
So yeah, so UMRBA is not directly involved in any monitoring. We're more involved in communicating about that monitoring. So I just want to make that distinction clear. It's USGS more than anybody who is doing that monitoring. And yes, they are using satellite data to compare landforms. So this is the sediment measurement that happened in this UMRR ecosystem status and trends report is accounting for land surface area. So drawing polygons using machine learning to identify how much land area is there in 1 year, and then coming back 10 years later and measuring that again and accounting for total loss. And so that's how the sediment is being tracked. The sediment movement is being tracked on the upper Mississippi River. Unfortunately, we don't have like a way to measure below the surface of water. That would be great to determine where sediment's leaving. But we don't have a way to capture that as quickly and as easily and as low budget.
Erin,
what-
oh, go ahead, Mary Ellen.
No, it's Chris.
Oh,
Oh.
Chris.
I was going to say to Erin that I had a note back from Wes and he's having problems. So we're going to ask him if he has information, he can text us more. And Caroline, I'm going to turn it to you now.
Well, Erin, this would maybe be, since we were talking about sedimentation and Mary Ellen's cover crop question, could you talk at us for a minute about something we were addressing in the beginning, and that is the nutrient reductions strategies workshop?
Yes, and I'll get my link up here. Can you guys see this?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I'll send this link in the chat shortly. But we have a multi-benefit conservation practice workshop. We're right in the middle of 2 workshops right now. So we held one in the spring and we'll be holding one in the fall, or was it the winter? Might have been the winter. But we're holding another one in the fall. And this is just a grouping of all sorts of agricultural experts, and they're all putting their heads together to develop ideas on how to manage agriculture to develop nutrient reduction strategies. And so there's this phrase called multi-benefit conservation practice, and that's appealing to aiding in nutrient reduction, aiding in soil retention, which is kind of one of the same, aiding in runoff reduction, all of these things. So this is a development of ideas. And at the end of this strategy, or at the end of this workshop series, there will be a report released on some of the better ideas. And some of those ideas they range widely from financial incentives for farmers, from added workshops and education opportunities, to test plots, to new cover crops being developed by the U of M. There's a lot of different strategies. So I'd encourage, if you're curious about that, look into those.
This is Caroline again. Could I ask Erin this question might come out sounding more rude than I really mean. Do you think that the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association is looking at issues from 36,000 feet above the ground, or do you think they are, you guys are grounded, like figuratively and literally?
I think that's like a challenging question to answer, in that I could see from a citizen standpoint that we are quite expanded in our scope, that we're not really connecting to issues that are more local. However, I wouldn't say that that's an oversight. That's more of the purpose of UMRBA, in that a lot of our work is with federal partners and state partners, and a lot of our work is funding large initiatives. So I think we can appear distant to people who are more locally minded, and that's because our scope is distant on purpose.
Okay,
But
I buy that.
it can be hard to connect with some of our initiatives because they are so broad in scope.
I thought you said a really interesting thing before we kind of went public tonight about some of your the complexity of this 5-state organization, and the sometimes odd bedfellows that you have to keep. Those are my words, everyone, not Erin's. Do you want to address that for a moment?
Yeah, well, we have partners. You can see our list of partners down below. We range from the Army Corps of Engineers to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to USGS, and that's just in this one project with the Status and Trends flyers. And I spoke to people at every one of these agencies to develop these flyers and get their feedback. And it kind of appeared interesting that we'd speak to the Army Corps of Engineers to the degree that we do. But something that's sort of, it was unknown to me before I joined UMRBA, is that the Army Corps of Engineers has the two programs, UMRR and NESP, they're the funding body for those two programs. And UMRR is the program that developed the status and trends report. So USGS is responsible for the most of the research for that report, but US Army Corps of Engineers is a major funder of that initiative. And together they're executing long-term monitoring on the upper Mississippi River. And long-term monitoring is a huge initiative with tons of monitoring data where you can get trends like this that's 25 years long. And so it can appear interesting that we have partners like the Army Corps of Engineers who are in charge of making sure that navigation can occur on the upper Mississippi River system. And that's a very political environment. You can read, there's a great book called The River We Have Wrought. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. And that breaks down our dual responsibility to enable navigation on the Mississippi River and what that does to the Mississippi River, and then how that changes the ecosystem and how that changes flood response and all sorts of things with the Mississippi River. So I'd encourage you to look into that. And then NESP, I briefly touched on it, but NESP is navigation and ecosystem sustainability. And that is a really interesting program where there is a 50-50 funding split. So Congress has designated, I forget the dollar number, but it's just starting up. And half of the money is going to restoring locks and dams and renewing them because they are falling apart. And half of that money is going directly to ecosystem services. So those are things like fish passageways and building side channels so that animals can move around the lock and dam system without ever encountering it. So there's it is complex on the upper Mississippi River system. You could definitely learn about it for a year and still feel like you're wrapping your head around it, just like I am right now. But there's a lot of funding here, and there's a strong partnership that has a long history of doing what we can for the river system.
Chris, or David Zentner put in a comment, and we've got Kevin Lee. That
I'm afraid I don't understand David Zentner, so maybe we can have him say what it is he's typed in quick.
can you want to unmute Z?
Okay. I was trying to respond to the question about what are the three rivers that are the major sediment contributors. And my guess was two of them might be, one in my state, our namesake river, the Minnesota River, is the major sediment delivery system from our state. And I also think in Wisconsin, the Chippewa River is a huge source of sediment from that state. So I was just trying to play the game and respond to, I think it was Chris that asked the question sometime back. So, and then I have a question.
There you go.
Does UMRBA, like the Great Lakes Fund, also organized around the state and funded by the state that share the Great Lakes, does that provide a funding source for habitat projects on the Mississippi River in the 5-state area, or other kinds of projects that are restorative?
Yeah, so UMRBA does not fund the habitat projects. UMRBA gets funding from the same source as the habitat projects, so complicated money movement, but we are involved in planning for habitat restoration projects on the upper Mississippi River. Those are usually referred to as HREPs, and those are projects created by the US Army Corps of Engineers to restore targeted habitats on the upper Mississippi River. So that looks like mussel bed restoration or fisheries restoration, island building for aquatic bird habitat. And we're involved in the process of planning for those and developing strategic initiatives to secure further funding for those.
So do those funds generally go to the 5 DNRs, NGOs, who typically receives that kind of funding?
So that's usually with the Army Corps of Engineers is typically receiving that funding in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a really interesting one from Kevin Lee in Winneshiek County. I live down in the center of Iowa, and we've heard about this, that your difficulties in Winneshiek County, that you've lost your roadside vegetation manager, and I understand even the engineer. He's asking, is Umbra involved in roadside vegetation management to slow water flow and also buffer ag runoff?
So we're not directly involved in anything that is that local, but that is a topic that is being developed and studied by members of that or participants in the nutrient reduction workshop that we hosted. So I attended a talk on strategies to implement that and make it more cost effective. And so we're part of the group of people that develops more strategic initiatives and tries to develop adoption strategies for people using vegetation management to slow water flow.
Thanks, Erin.
Mhm.
Okay, and Christine put in the link from the Decorah News about the county engineer leaving as well. Amy Bishop has a great question. Changes as a result of climate change have been mentioned in terms of more water more often. But have we considered the impact of additional increased ag tiling over the past decades, sending excess water downstream more quickly, along with nitrates, pesticides, and likely also some sediment? Along with this question, is Umbra able to advocate for wetlands restoration and/or construction in ag areas? And Amy's aware that this is finally becoming a focus, hopefully included in the next farm bill, but curious if it was on the Umbra radar as well. Great question, Amy.
Great questions, actually, wonderful questions. In terms of understanding the impact of increased addition or increased agricultural tiling, there is conversation about the impacts of agricultural tiling, but there's no maps of agricultural tiling. We don't know where it is, how extensive it is. And so it's a developing issue that people are finally becoming aware of and trying to give space to. But in terms of actually understanding how that impact occurs is really challenging. It's also really challenging to connect something like a non-point source of pollutants being most often agricultural contamination. And so like it's very hard legally and even hydrologically to say this farm here caused this pond to have elevated nitrogen. It's a challenging thing to say that in many ways. So I think it's something it's being covered in the nutrient reduction strategies workshop. People are talking about it. It's of focus, but in terms of actually understanding that impact, I would love to see more development of that issue, but we just don't have the tools right now. And then advocating for wetlands restoration and or construction in agricultural areas. So most of our initiatives are on the main stem of the Upper Mississippi River. So there's not a lot of wetland activity in that area. And but it's starting to become more of a focus. So this idea of floodplain reconnection to stop the impacts of flooding is now an emerging initiative that's coming out. And so that involves establishing floodplains where they used to exist. So recovering farmland and establishing wetlands on the Upper Mississippi River, restoring wetlands where they've been impeded to allow for that water to be stored along the sides of the Mississippi River instead of traveling down the river. So it's becoming a focus, you're right, and it's on our radar.
Thank you. Christine, do you have more questions out there? I've run out of my list.
I just have one comment, Erin, that I just found out about not too long ago, is that the Mississippi River is actually pretty clean until it hits about midstream Iowa. So just south of Clinton, all of a sudden, you know, when our major channels come into the Mississippi and probably across the state, apparently it just, I mean, I was told that it's one of the cleanest rivers up until it hits that mid part of Iowa, which I thought we had contamination even at the beginning of the Mississippi on the eastern side, as it, you know, borders our state. But I was told that it really hits, and then all of a sudden it just like is a pretty much night and day.
I've heard a similar comparison, but coming in at the Missouri River in terms of sediment load. And I think if you break down the contaminant of choice, you could find an intersection at almost any stage of the Mississippi River where something's coming in where it wasn't there before. And that's kind of just a challenging thing with the river, is that there's so many inputs of so many different sources. And if we want to add something like PFAS, that's all the way up and down the river. So I think it depends on the parameters you're looking for. But there certainly are certain tributaries that are accounting for, they're contributing more than others up and down the river.
So Kathy has a question. How do you restore wetlands? And follows it up with remove the tile. And I'm just going to say, in the case of NRCS, yes, you do have to remove the tile or at least block it, but I'm going to let you've got way more information than I do, Erin. Would you address that one?
Well, that's certainly part of it. Some of it is excavating fill that was put in there to raise the level of the land surface. And then sometimes it's planting and restoring vegetation. So there's a variety of different strategies that have been used depending on budget and application.
Thank you. And another one from Terry Wilkerson, related to large picture discussions. Is there discussion and planning about water diversion to dry areas or other states needing water?
That comes up. It's a cyclical news story, I think, pretty often. And there are discussions, but not within UMRBA and not within the partnership. That would be more, the onus on requesting that diversion would be on a state that would need that water. That idea is brought up quite often. I attended a talk this past fall, and I forget who did it, but I saw a talk on what practically, financially, that would mean to divert water from the Mississippi River to any state, such as Arizona. And his conclusion was it was cost prohibitive, is pretty highly cost prohibitive. So unless there's some major engineering breakthroughs, that's probably not a practical idea at this stage, but dry areas are facing a dire issue of having less water. So it could happen sometime in the future, and we want to prepare for a request with a lot of data and with a data-driven understanding of what the river can handle. So
thanks. Caroline has a wrap up, and it's by my phone, it is 7:58. So we're coming close to the end.
And David Zettner has his hand up again too.
Okay. So I'm going to read this note from Caroline, and we'll take David's, and then we'll see if we can't wrap her up for Erin tonight. Caroline is pointing out that there's a good case for townships, et cetera, to invest in covers to save money, thinking about Wynn County, it must be Minnesota, and yes, it is, and road management. And she's given us a great link here. While I'm saying all of this and telling you that there's a great link, I want to remind you that you will get a copy. Those of us who've registered, even the people who weren't able to be here, will get a copy of the presentation and the chat. So you have all of the questions and you can rewatch or look at the slides and all of that tomorrow. So I'll hand it back to you, Christine, for Z's question.
Okay, Z, you want to unmute?
Thanks, Christine and Chris. It isn't a question. Those who know me know I'm not an expert on hydrology changes, but I think the question about tiling is really cogent. We know that the Minnesota River the annual flow today is 80% higher than historically. And the four things I can think of, wetland destruction, tilling, soil tilling, and the loss of millions of acres of land farmed in Minnesota. In terms of their storage capacity, I am told would be a major contributor. But then historic tiling systems, and more recently, in the last 20 years, what's called pattern tiling, that have become almost point sources. And in fact, I would like to see them tested as point sources. You know, we know that the Clean Water Act exempted, when it was passed in 1970 and began to be administered in 72, non-point source pollution. But as a layperson who's had extensive experience as a volunteer for over 6 decades, those are the four things I can think of, and I think they are real, and in particular, tiling systems. I know David Mingy is on tonight, and I know you want to wrap up, Chris, but David may even like to make a comment. If not, I'm done. Thank you for a great program.
Yeah, thank you. David Mingy, do you want to unmute? Are you able to do that? It looks like he's still muted. So what
I'd like to say that I'm aware of one study from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency in southeastern Minnesota in developing nutrient contribution from farm fields. And if you send me an email after this, I can send you that information. There's a couple studies, and that is linking, because there is a struggle with non-point sources and accounting for non-point sources of agricultural contamination. So there's work developing the impacts of tile drainage, and there's work targeting contribution, and it's not just, and work targeting contribution, not just from runoff sources. So if you send me an email, I'd love to send you that report.
Yeah, that'd be great. Erin, if you want to include that, I can include it in the links for everybody, if that's okay, if we can share it with everybody, that'd be great.
It's going to take me a bit of digging to get it, so
That's
I can
fine.
email it to you. Yeah.
That's fine.
Erin, it's Caroline. Is that the report that the MPCA put out in maybe 2015 and was an astonishing indictment of Minnesota agriculture and its impact on water quality, sedimentation, habitat, everything?
I think we're thinking of the same thing.
About
Yes.
then, yeah. There are
Yeah.
some, it's a bit wieldy, but there are some really, it includes some really good executive summaries. I mean, you can read the whole thing, but there are some really good executive summaries connected with that too, if that's the same one.
Yes, and there's some great comparative graphs in there that really pull out the differences. And that work is still ongoing. There's not yet a new report, but that's continuing to go on in the Minnesota PCA.
It's astonishing that the writers did not lose their jobs.
Well, they have support.
Very
They have
interesting.
support.
Good.
We have quite a bit going on here in Iowa where our current legislators are taking away funding for monitors that are monitoring our waters. So anyway, Erin, thank you so much for a fabulous presentation. Chris Henning, thank you for co-hosting with us this evening. And Caroline, thank you for all your contributions and organizing for this.
Yeah.
That is-
Okay, so I have to, Christine, I'm going to detour you for a moment. Okay, Erin, we just so rarely get praise to our faces, but I'm going to read you this message from Emily Shorning to everyone, to Erin out loud here to make sure you get it. Thank you for a wonderful talk, really interesting, great overview. Erin, this is the best Zoom seminar I've been to in many weeks. That is high praise, girl. Would love you to include this report under discussion at the end when you send out the email. Okay, Christine, that's a you thing and you can do that. Anyway, well done, Erin. On my behalf also, many, many thanks for working with us on this so thoroughly. Thank you.
And
Thank you for
all
having
of
me.
you-
You bet. All right.
and
Everybody
thank all
have a
of you for
beautiful
being
week.
here.
Thank you for taking time out on your busy week to join us. Thank you, Rosemary and others. And Kathy, thanks.
Thank you.
Jeffrey.
All right. Are we closing out, Christine?
Yeah, I think we're good.
All right. Great, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night. And we'll see you. We have our last program next month, same
That's
Tuesday
right.
next month on the climate land leaders.
Yep.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.